Today we welcome Colleen Baxter, and she is the Membership and Events Coordinator for the Galway Chamber of Commerce. And Colleen, you're very welcome to be with us.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be asked.
Well, we have been doing a number of different podcasts, and what we've been talking about, and it's really crucial, I suppose, in terms of gender balance and gender biases. We're talking about the words we use and how the words we use have changed. So Tribes Press, as you know, is a book publisher. So we see that, for example, what Enid Blyton would have written back in the day would not be acceptable in a book today, because we have changed as a people, as society has changed, and there's more gender balance, I suppose. So we thought, what will we do is we will ask Colleen Baxter, because she knows all about events and all about membership for the Galway Chamber of Commerce, the business community in Galway. And we thought we'd ask you this question. How has the language of business changed? Because now there are more women in business, or are there more women in business?
There are definitely more women in business, without a doubt, and it's wonderful to see so many women leading the way, not only in Galway, but around the country. I guess when I started thinking about this, one of the things that struck me was that language constantly evolves. Like, even if we look the past 2.5 years, words like PPE, PCR, those lovely words like antigen, they weren't part of our day-to-day vocabulary, but now we use them and you don't pass any heat on them. It's what we use, and the language evolved so swiftly, and it does, and it can change overnight. And I think one of the things that I feel are important is embracing the language. And the same can be said if you look at a business sense. So if we look back 50, 60 years ago or so, there were very few, or maybe none in some cases, women in senior management or leader positions as such in business. It was ran by men. Now, the good news is that obviously we've seen a huge change in this and a huge amount of female leaders across all sectors. But back 50, 60 years ago, there was no need as such for gender neutral or female versions of titles because the women weren't there. So I guess.
But the women, I suppose, in terms of, the women were there in the background, I suppose. But
they were. The women, and look, women have always been sort of keeping the ship afloat, for want of a better phrase. But I think if we look at some of the titles, they were predominantly male occupied. So it was a manager. So then when females moved up the ranks, we were referred to as female managers. They were guards, and then when the females became on board, they were band garda. So I think at the time it was quite new. Now, we are looking back a good few years ago, long before yourself and myself were about Marguerite.
And my father would say to me, "Would you look at the band garda there?" And I said, "Dad, Jeannie, whatever you do, don't say band garda, it's garda now." So that has changed. We're dropping those pieces from the language as well.
That's it. We are moving to more gender neutral language. So it's interesting. It went from male dominated to inclusive of female to maybe slightly more gender neutral now, because one of the things that I only became aware of quite recently is that there are over 70 genders. There are actually 72. So it's not even just a male-female conversation anymore. It is looking at the wider community. When it was a colleague mentioned 72, and I'm not going to lie, I had to look them up to see. And for me, it was a great educational piece. And I would consider myself relatively modern, but we're constantly learning. And this language and those 72 genders might not have been named or defined as such. So that's another way the language is evolving. So I do think.
And I wonder too, when you talk about the language evolving, is, you have a male, like a man in business can have a certain kind of language that he uses with other men, and then language that he uses with women. A woman will have language that she uses with her own gender. Now, we published a book there before Christmas, Sex Educated, and there was so much about different genders. So I'm not trying to be biased at all in male, female, but the way we speak to our own gender and the way we speak to the opposite gender can be quite different. But now that the neutrality is coming, is that shifting as well? Is there more respect across, or I don't know, is the word even respect?
I know what you mean. I know the point you're trying to make. I do agree that when engaging with maybe your own gender or whatever gender you identify with, you might be more comfortable and you might use different language. And one of the things that I came across this is maybe going back a few years slightly, but what I found interesting was if you're reviewing an employee, we use different language, or we definitely used different language to describe our employees. So when women come, now this is a generalization, so I don't want to upset anybody, but women tend to be described using softer terms. So we're compassionate, or we're organized, or enthusiastic, which are all great verbs, but men are described as analytical or competent or practical. So now, personally, I think that to be analytical and compassionate are both great traits, and they're positive annotations. But the thing is, from a business perspective, if you have an employee, do you want a compassionate or an analytical employee? And I know it depends on the industry, and it depends on the job, etc. And this is all very generalized. But if you look at the words themselves, so we're going back to the words we use, analytical talks about your ability, how you're strategic, what you can offer to a business. Whereas to be compassionate, personally, I think is more relationship orientated. It's looking about positive work environment or culture, but maybe seen as less businesslike, if that makes sense. So the words we use describing people or engaging can always be positive, but could actually have different annotations to it.
I'm just thinking, when you were talking about that there, I'm thinking that the way leadership itself has changed, because resonant leadership is more important now, where you're building a relationship with your employee, you're building a relationship with the person you're working with, and you're understanding them from their point of view. You're working off their strengths. You're not forcing them into a box. You are more flexible. You're adapting to your environment a little more. You have more compassion in terms of now business weeks. Some organizations are down to a 4-day week, and that this having a 4-day week can be critically important to productivity and creativity levels in certain sectors of business. So I'm wondering then, what do you think about that in terms of the leadership is changing into a resonant leadership? Is it women that are bringing that to us?
I think that women bring a lot to the table, and that's not just personal bias speaking. I think that we bring balance, not just in terms of gender, but we bring balance in terms of our opinions, our life skills, the way we grew up in comparison, and what we've learned. You could say we bring a soft side, but not in a bad way. I think it's needed if you're around a table and there's a heated discussion, which happens all the time. It could be the dinner table or the boardroom. And I think we offer a different perspective that sometimes men don't have. And the same can be said for men and all genders, that different genders offer different perspectives. And it's bringing them together so you can look at things from a different angle and maybe come up with a different solution or a different opinion. So it is that collaborative piece that we need to engage together to actually get the better of it, ironically enough, rather than fighting amongst ourselves.
And you are the membership and events coordinator of the Galway Chamber of Commerce, Colleen. And what are you noticing? Are there shifting trends in membership now? What are you seeing?
Definitely. Well, we've seen huge changes in the last 2 years. That goes without saying. I think one of the things that I've noticed is priorities. So obviously the last 2 years we've all shifted our priorities, be it personal or professional. But one of the words that has come up quite frequently, and it's been used in the last few years, but it's more prominent anyways in my conversations, is diversity and inclusion. So it's looking at differentiating between both diversity and inclusion, so that businesses want to be diverse in terms of their gender, having different genders around the table, sexual orientations, race, etc., but also to be an inclusive environment, which actually, while we tend to lump diversity and inclusion together, they're nearly two strands of the same tree, maybe, if that's a good example. Because if you have a diverse group of employees, you also want to be inclusive and create an inclusive environment that supports all genders and all races, so that they can then go to leadership, which helps the bigger picture. So D&I, or diversity and inclusion, is definitely a big piece at the moment. And it's great to see businesses embracing it. It can be scary, for want of a better word. I think it can be daunting, but a lot of businesses are making steps towards including it. And some of the larger companies have already embraced it and are doing absolutely amazing. So it's great to see that.
I wonder, in terms of the language that we use, then, if we're going through, there's 72 different types of genders, which, and our business structures are embracing this. I think it's an exciting time in business, to be honest. I think it's really exciting, because with every person's viewpoint, every person's different way of looking at the world, we gain some richness that we can apply to our business. So I think it's exciting. And I have learned, like you have said, in the pandemic, new language. I've learned new language in the past 2 years myself, words that I wouldn't have used in common day language. There's one thing, I was in a meeting yesterday and we were talking about gender imbalance and different things like that. And one of the women there, she said, it's important for women to stand up and say something if something is wrong. It's important to speak. Do you find that now in business that women are speaking up more? They're not hiding behind the man, they're speaking up and they're saying, what I think is this.
Definitely, and I 100% agree. It is an exciting time to be in business and to be embracing these changes. I think, yes, women are more confident in a way, and we are happier to stand up for ourselves. I think maybe it used to be a case that we might have relied on other people to stand up for us, and I do think that we need support of men and other genders as well. But I have seen it at different events and cases where women will stand up and go, I don't agree with that. And it can be a lively debate rather than an argument as such. And debate is healthy. It's the only way we can learn and grow. So definitely, and I think it used to be a case that if women stood up for themselves, they were branded as maybe harsh, or using negative language, that she's a bit harsh, she's a tough cookie. Which is a phrase that I used to use, and then I started going, hold on, I don't think that's not a compliment. I've probably been referred to as a tough cookie myself in the past. But I think, not that we're okay with that, but we're sort of going, do you know what, if another gender was to stand up for themselves, nobody would comment on it. So I think we can do it too. And it's the likes of the celebrations like International Women's Day that do give a bit of the confidence and start the conversations, so you know who your allies are as well, which is great to see.
And just to finally conclude on this podcast episode, which has been really enlightening, I have enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. I wondered then, because you're the events coordinator, is there a lot of work towards creating events that are that support all genders?
Definitely, we're looking at becoming more inclusive across the board. So one is events. So let's say traditionally we would have held golf events, which from my experience is predominantly male-led. Personally, I don't know how to golf, but I don't have any interest either. So looking at doing events that maybe cater to a more female demographic, and there's no one size fits all for anything, but maybe looking at, doing walks. It's also looking at being inclusive in terms of timing. Kids, trying to get the kids up for school is a nightmare for most people until they get to the stage where they can dress themselves. So it's not scheduled meetings for 8 a.m. in the morning, because maybe this doesn't suit a working parent. It is being inclusive, looking at as well different meanings of inclusivity. So doing something that maybe caters for those with a physical disability as well. So being conscious of that when you organize an event, that there's not loads of stairs, so the wheelchair user can't attend. So it's embracing all different elements to be inclusive and diverse, I guess, and trying to marry them together in the best way possible.
Well, Colleen, it has been fascinating speaking to you. I hope we can speak again at some stage in another episode of of Script to Story podcast series. Thank you so much for being part of this one. And I wish you every success in your future with Galway Chamber of Commerce, or wherever you decide to go in your life. Thank you very much, Colleen.
Thank you so much.